Hey, Salvador Briggman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Today we're speaking with a Kickstarter campaign that has raised over $150,000. This is actually a really interesting product. It's for an illuminated mute button. Now, if you do Zoom calls, you do virtual calls, one of the things that I obviously do a lot of with my distributed team and people that I'm working with, coaching calls, etc. This button actually will allow you to just mute easily. It's actually really, it looks fun. It's like this illuminated button for virtual calls. It increases productivity, boosts confidence, decreases interruptions, whole host of stuff. But I kind of wanted to bring on the entrepreneur behind this today for a few different reasons. Number one, this guy has incredible company values, man. Something to aspire to and I think learn from. He's done a super good job of just leading, I think, with good values. And that probably comes from his family and the ways that he wants to portray himself there. But also, another thing is the way in which he was able to assemble such an effective team in order to come together and to bring the product to the masses. You're going to hear a lot about the team building techniques that he used to get engineers to work with him, to get marketers to work with him. And this is, to me, the hallmark of leadership, is knowing how to assemble a team of people that work well together. They're headed towards some kind of a common vision. If you don't have a team, you're going to be an individual up against other teams. It's always really hard. Like if you're playing football, right? How can you be the quarterback? And how can you also be the running back and also the guy who does the punting, right? Obviously, I'm a little bit behind on my football lingo. The guy who punts, for field goals, the kicker, and then also being the coach, right? You have to be all these like roles at once. And if you're up against another team that has individual people that are part of these different positions, you're going to be like, there's no way you can compete, obviously. So today's podcast is going to get a little bit into that, the team building, and also how he was able to create a product from scratch. You're going to hear about some of the marketing techniques that they used to blow it out of the park and to really make sure that this campaign was super successful. Now, among many of the reasons why I had this person on the show, I think that one of the things that we're lacking in this niche and in product creation in general is a focus on infrastructure. And here's why. When you're trying to get a new product out there, the only thing you're thinking about is having good design, good engineering, a well-crafted product, something that is going to connect with users. And you think about marketing, right? How do you get the word out there? We don't spend a lot of time thinking about infrastructure, setting up a proper company, having people in charge of different departments, having different skill sets that are needed to pull off a really big raise, assembling a team around yourself, having coaches, like that kind of stuff. We don't really talk about that, I think, in the niche. So I think that this episode will help introduce you to some of these concepts for MuteMe. And I hope that you kind of come away realizing wow, if this guy can pull this off and, do 150K raise, more than just under 3,000 customers on Kickstarter, that I can actually do this as well. I'm sure that you have the same resource, same know-how, and if you really try, you can also get people excited about your idea and wanting to work with you. So I hope you take away a little bit of that from today's podcast. I'm going to share some links at the end of the show, so stay around for that, and it's coming up right after this. This podcast episode is sponsored by the Gadget Flow. The Gadget Flow reaches over 28 million people, and they've been around since 2012. They are Indiegogo and Kickstarter experts. They featured over 5,000 crowdfunding campaigns, and if you have a technology or design campaign, it is a great platform to generate awareness and get backers. You can check them out at thegadgetflow.com/submit and list your project today. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Today we're speaking with the founder of a product which I think literally everyone in this entire audience can use, something that I also need when I am doing my podcast and when I'm working throughout the day. This is for MuteMe, the Illuminated Mute Button. It's basically for virtual calls, and it can help increase your productivity, boost confidence, and decrease interruptions. This campaign has already raised over $150,000, nearly 3,000 backers on Kickstarter, and we are privileged today to be speaking with Scott, who can tell us a little bit about the product and sort of the behind the scenes there. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Salvador. Privileged to be here.
So can we get started maybe with where this idea came from? Because it's genius, man. I love it.
We love hearing that. So we're located in Northern California, and we are a group of parents who all got together because we all were running into the same issue. Backing up to the beginning of the pandemic, as we all recall and are still living through for the most part, all personal interactions switched over to video conferencing through Zoom and Teams and WebEx and other platforms. And so we were a group of working professionals who went from highly interactive jobs to pretty much all being at home with our young kids and doing everything online. For myself, I too was a working professional and made the decision earlier on in the pandemic to go back for a graduate degree. I've been doing my master's of real estate development at USC, and that, interestingly, I've never stepped foot on campus once as a student. Too many people can relate to. But toward the end of the summer, I had a situation where a professor thought that they were on mute, and they were not. Another student the professor was interacting with thought they were on mute, and they weren't. Meanwhile, I leaned off camera and started laughing at the whole thing, not realizing that somehow I was on mute.
Oh, man.
It's horrifying. And half the class started texting me. All these people I've never met, only knew through Zoom, started texting me, Scott, you gotta shut up. You're not on mute.
Yeah, it can be embarrassing.
It was a really awkward, embarrassing situation. I was raw from that, and I think that was a Tuesday. Thursday, I was in a planning commission hearing for a major California city, and one of the planning commissioners on the board did the same thing. And about that same time, we all heard the story of a Supreme Court justice who flushed a toilet on an open mic, and there was another U.S. senator who dropped some unsavory words, thinking he was muted while on a nationally televised hearing regarding USPS. So just all of that happened in a very brief period of time. And we were talking about it, and there's not an end in sight for what we're doing right now with work and learning over digital platforms. And even once we do go back to quote unquote life as normal, whatever that looks like, there's definitely been a seismic shift towards learning and distance working.
Totally. Yeah.
It's not an issue that's just an issue today. We were talking about it. We're like, this is something that's probably something we're going to be living with for a long time. Hopefully not 100%, but definitely in part. So, I had this, I was still working full time, going to school full time. As with many people, an idea is worthless without execution. An idea is great, but if you can't turn it into reality, it doesn't mean anything. So instantly started having the conversation, okay, if we're going to do this, who do we need? And so I reached out to some friends, Handeep and Parm, Handeep and I met at a NASA hackathon 4 years ago. We got to work together there and sort of maintain the friendship since then. And then some other friends who were actually neighbors of ours at our last place who we engaged with. They had a child about the same age as our son. And I knew that they were a strong marketing couple. They work in technical marketing and also have an e-commerce company of their own. So we got the group together. Interestingly, the two other couples, again, Handeep and Parm on one side and Ty and Brittany on the other, had never met each other. And so they were relying on the common bond, which was kind of interesting because, here we are working on a digital video conferencing tool for people to interact remotely with a team that had never physically met. And so that was we're working on this tool solely Zoom calls every week. And I think that was an interesting factor too, is having to live through some of those struggles and challenges that we were trying to solve in our team meetings. It's funny. We still, almost every meeting, somebody, especially during the logon procedures, somebody will be on mute. It's clear how pervasive.
So had you guys ever made a product before? Because from August to launch in December, that's like super aggressive, honestly. I think that's amazing that you were able to get this team assembled and to get this out there in that length of time. Like, had you done an e-commerce product before? So
Ty and Brittany had done something in the child's clothing section, nothing in consumer electronics. And Handeep and Parm also had something Handeep is actually a children's book author. So there was some e-commerce experience, but nothing really related to this device as far as an e-commerce. Now, that said, Handeep is a PhD engineer with a large Fortune 50 tech firm whose name I'm not allowed to say out here. Ty works at a large Silicon Valley tech company as well. So there's lots of tech experience. Sam, my wife, works for HP Enterprise in a global role. So there's lots of tech experience on the team, but this was actually something new for us in putting the product together. As far as the iterations, it was lightning fast. We were operating beginning under the internal operating orders that if we were going to do this, we needed to do it fast because getting this done in a year wasn't going to do anybody any good. If this was going to work from a business standpoint, we needed to get it in people's hands fast. And there's really sort of a humanistic aspect to this too. We've seen all of the people struggling in distance learning and all of the Zoom stress and people having these sort of...
It's such the right time. Yeah, it's definitely the right time.
really we need to get this in. So what I didn't know when we first pulled the team together is that Parm is actually a serial, I don't want to undervalue him and call him a serial tinkerer. He's far more than that, but that's sort of the word that comes to mind. And he has what we've come to call the printer farm at his house. And so lots of 3D printers and laser machines and such. And so Parm got right on in the first week starting to build a prototype. And within about a month, we had our first working prototype that actually looked like MuteMe today. We've gone through 26 iterations since.
That's incredible.
Officially on V2. V2 is what's going to be shipping to the Kickstarter backers. But there's been a whole progression from that first meeting in August to where we are today.
In that beginning stage when Parm was in the workshop, basically cranking out the initial prototypes, you know, the look and feel prototype with 3D printing, I feel like is pretty straightforward, right? You can get a sense of how it feels in your hand, the size of the thing, but the electronics aspect, like, did he have experience with that, or how did you figure that out?
Yeah, he did. The product that we're doing is actually, we've got patent protection on it.
Good, yeah.
Patent pending. Kind of fundamental to being able to pursue a patent is that what you're doing has to have uniqueness. So what we're doing by definition, obviously, is built on other principles, hasn't been done before, and in this precise way. So there's an element, where Parm has done some things like this, but there was an additional element as well that really required somebody to think strongly outside of the box and be able to apply that sort of new thinking to the problem we were trying to solve. So there was definitely an element of that going on as well.
A lot of founders will have their idea, a really big idea, right? And they'll get super excited, but it kind of ends there. It seems like one of the key choices you made was to make this about more than just you, right? In assembling a team. Is that something that comes naturally to you, or did you learn that through working experience? How did you learn to assemble a team like this?
So I have long operated under the theory that you can own the entire pie and have a really tiny pie, or you can split the pie and grow it exponentially. And that's really the what we operated on here was, sure, there's a piece of me that says, okay, this could be really big and I could own the whole thing because it was my idea. But it wasn't if you look at the product that we have today, sure, I was the one who forgot to mute myself, but the product that we have today is the product of multiple people, and I never would have gotten it where it is today without the whole team that we have. That's my philosophy on MuteMe, and really for everything that we do, is there's no the lone wolf concept sounds great in novels, doesn't really work well in real life. And so our goal was to find a team that certainly had the skill set required, but that also worked well together to split the pie between all of us, then to grow that exponentially. And
love that, yeah.
Together we'd go far more than any of us would do individually.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's also a good message when it comes to parenting and your kids. Like, you guys can work together and make something really cool that an individual could not do alone, right? So I love those values. When it comes to Kickstarter, I have a couple of questions here, but before we get into that, could you just share with the listeners, some of the functionality behind MuteMe? Why is this something they should consider backing and also maybe getting once it comes out?
Yeah, definitely. So MuteMe is, as we started the conversation, and as you hear in the name, it revolves around muting. There is, in our interaction on Zoom and other video conferencing platforms, some of the issues we were running to were, sure, the situation where I thought I was muted, but I wasn't. But there's a lot of other use cases as well. For example, for the last 4 years, my wife has worked from home. She works on a global team. I traveled during the middle of the week. Mondays, Fridays, I was home. We each had home offices, and we'd go into each other's offices to chat about something and kind of do this whole miming. And I'm doing it, realizing you and I are on video, kind of holding a hand phone up to your ear. Are you talking, or are you on mute? And never really knowing. And it's kind of dumb when the other person's not on the phone, because then they respond back to you. With everybody being at home right now, there's definitely an aspect where you don't understand, you don't know if the other person is in a meeting or muted or not. So, if that's kids coming in or other people in the house, you don't know if that other person's muted or not.
Totally, yeah.
The other aspect of this is that we all, especially on the working professional side of this, I know for myself, if I'm in a meeting, I have probably 20 or 30 other tabs or financial models open. And God forbid somebody says, hey, Scott, what do you think about that? Now, all of a sudden, I'm scrambling among screens to try to get back to the video conferencing platform. Sure, there are keystrokes that you can hit that will mute and unmute oneself, but you have to actually have that screen pulled up in order to hit the keystroke. It doesn't work if I'm in Excel.
I love the colors too, man. Like the light up, it looks fun. It looks fun to have, and it's kind of almost like a novelty item on your desk,
It does. And so, it's a notification item for the user, but it's also a beacon for everyone else around them to know what's going on. And it's interesting you bring up the lights. We originally operated on a red-green basis. And then as we started talking to customers, because we really wanted to make sure we're building a product that everyone likes, we realized that, well, none of the six of us have any color blindness or other visual impairment. There's actually a large segment of the population that does contend with that on a daily basis. So we changed the electronic structure to allow for RGB LEDs that allow us to program for any multitude of colors. So something that wasn't around at the beginning of the Kickstarter campaign that we built during the campaign before the end was a user interface on the computer that allows the user to select what color they want mute to mean, what color they want unmute to mean.
So cool. Yeah.
Process effect.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. I mean, that's super cool, man. I think the ability to program it definitely is something that would make me a lot more interested in it. And being able to select like all of those different colors and such, that's really, really interesting to me. So I had just a couple questions here about the Kickstarter campaign. So one of the things that looks like you took away was this idea of returning backers, right? And if this is your first campaign, you might not know about that. And I would love if you could just maybe expand a tiny bit on what you meant by that point.
So when we launched on December 3rd, we, as many other people have done, and I think I've talked about on your show previously, lined up people that we knew, the friends and family who we knew we could count on for that initial push at the beginning. Friends and family only go so far, and they're crucial early on, but you've got to start the momentum early on to then launch the flywheel that is those returning backers. This is not an e-commerce product that you put out there. One thing we ran into was looking at Facebook advertising, things like that. You can shoot Facebook ads off into the ether, but most people are not intimately familiar with going to Kickstarter, creating an account to then go find the campaign and back the product, realizing they don't get it for several months after the fact. And so I think versus a typical e-commerce platform where you would launch ads out to a targeted campaign and a targeted audience, we realized that we needed to get to the people who had purchased or backed anywhere from 1 to, I think we've got somebody who backed almost 4,000 projects and campaigns on our list of backers. And so we did that through a couple aspects. One was we really made sure that we pushed hard so that we ended up as a trending campaign. By the time we were wrapping up, we were actually the number 2 technology campaign on Kickstarter globally, which was really awesome. Definitely getting that magic score up as well. And also engaging a marketing firm. We avoided that early on, thinking we can do this and we'll figure out, we've got lots of ad experience on the team. But we did engage Jella midway through the campaign and felt that was a strong action as well that allowed us to really engage those people who had demonstrated their interest in Kickstarter previously and would return to back our campaign as well. So that was really key.
Okay, so in terms of returning backers, one is like triggering returning backers by kind of getting the kettle warm before you, I don't know where I'm going with that analogy, I guess doing a pre-launch, right? By getting people warmed up a little bit before you go live, it seems. And then the other is being aware of using Facebook ads to engage existing backers. Is that kind of what you're saying there?
That's correct. Yeah. And really understanding that, again, you can't just take a shotgun approach and throw these out onto Facebook and a general audience. Really having the target audience focus on those returning backers is key through things like Facebook ads and email campaigns.
If you're worried about the fulfillment and shipping part of your Kickstarter campaign when it comes to getting out all those perks and rewards to your backers, rest assured, I've put together a complete Kickstarter fulfillment and shipping checklist for you, and it's free. This is sponsored by the folks at Fulfillrite, and they thought that you should have this checklist as part of your arsenal going into a crowdfunding campaign. If you want to get instant access to this checklist and it's free, you can go to fulfillrite.com/checklist. Again, that is fulfillrite.com/checklist. fulfillrite.com/checklist. Just go to that link and you can download it immediately.
Why do you think that is?
Well, again, I think there's, on the one spectrum of e-commerce, we have companies like Fast who are facilitating one-click purchasing. Kickstarter is on the opposite side of that spectrum. There are multiple hurdles that a user has to go through. You have to, again, for somebody who's never used Kickstarter before, sign up, create an account, navigate the campaign. And I think there's also, and we found this as well, even within the family and friends pool, there are people who just fundamentally don't understand or don't trust the concept of paying for something today that is not fully built yet. Still has to go through the manufacturing run and then getting it months later. I think we live in and I know I appreciate this, but we live in a world where you order something on Amazon, you get it the next day or 2 days later. And Kickstarter is definitely different. It takes somebody who appreciates the technology or the project and can also delay that gratification till later as well. So they really have to, it's a group of people who believe in the project versus somebody who's buying it because they just want to use it for their meeting tomorrow or the next day. So it's I would say it's definitely a different psychology for that group.
One of the things you mentioned was Fast. What is that exactly?
Yeah, Fast is now I'll be advertising their group as well. Fast is a company out of Silicon Valley that does one-click checkout. I think their website's fast.com. You can check them out, but they are actually only about a year old, and they're trying to lower that threshold of how much time it takes for somebody to go in. And you don't want to enter your shipping address, credit card information, all that. So it's a platform that sits on top of your browser. I think it's similar to like a Chrome extension, but it allows you, again, just to do one-click checkout and really reduces that threshold for somebody to make a purchase.
And this is fast.co, right? So is that kind of like for a Shopify store, or if you had a WordPress website kind of?
Well, before I become Fast's ambassador, I mentioned them as the one side of the spectrum versus the other. I'm not going to pretend to be the authority on everything they do. But yeah, I think they do integrate with multiple sites.
Interesting.
I can't speak to their integration with Shopify.
Okay. Interesting. One of the other takeaways you had, it seems like, is being aware of what happens if you do end up becoming really popular, the way that you guys were. Why is that something that you think is important to pass on?
Yeah, so when we launched, we had an image of what success looked like on Kickstarter. And while we certainly hoped for the moon, we had realistic expectations as well. I would say, I believe I speak for the team when I say $155,000 raised was certainly in the realm of what we thought would be really cool, but certainly more than we realistically thought we would raise. But I think what we saw was that this really struck a nerve with how we engage with each other these days. But when you look at the manufacturing and supply chain, there's definitely a jump that occurs from smaller quantities to much larger quantities. And certainly we're not a Logitech, we're not a Johnson & Johnson doing millions of units of throughput in manufacturing, but there's variations like soft tooling versus hard tooling for injection molded plastic, which is what we're using for the housing on the device. Those are very different design processes, have very different price points as well. Soft tooling is for lower quantities and is a lower price point for tooling. Hard tooling is a much more time-intensive, permanent, costly process. And so, there's that difference. There's also, just from a logistics standpoint, we've got 3 couples and 3 garages. We are strongly think through the space utilization of our garages with the number of units that we have ordered. And so there's just multiple layers of success, right? We hit our goal on Kickstarter, and now we have to execute. And then there's what we ran into. We hit 10x that goal. And by the way, we have enterprises reaching out to us very frequently, looking at large orders as well that are far beyond anything that was available on Kickstarter. And so again, there are just 2 very different scales. And so there are 2 sets of manufacturers and 2 different approaches to getting the same product into customers' hands.
And when it comes to the way in which you're viewing success, what would you say is the most rewarding, right? Because you have a lot of backers, you have a lot of people who are excited. You're being able to maybe pay for your tooling or help the costs of tooling possibly with raising this amount of money. What to you is like the most rewarding part of the success?
Again, we're a new business. And so making sure that our books are right and that we're not losing money on this venture is important, and that we have cash to grow. And Kickstarter has contributed to all of that. But I would say that for this team and for the reasons which we founded this company, success for us is defined as children who are struggling with distance learning being able to have a tool that allows them to more freely interact with their teachers. It's for grandparents who struggle to use video conferencing platforms to see their grandchildren to be able to get on a platform and have confidence they can use it. It's for the families who are just ripping their hair out at home because you've got multiple kids on school, parents trying to do their jobs, everybody on video platforms, being able to operate and work, learn, talk to friends with the confidence knowing that they can control the environment that they're in. When I look at the last year and the trajectory that we've all pursued in our various ways, this is one that's been consistent throughout groups, is this sort of fear of not using the technology, but the fear of what's going on around us. Am I on mute? Am I not on mute? And there's this stress that comes with it. So for us, truly being able to pull that stress out of the equation for all of those different groups that's how we define success, is being able to, really give people the chance to focus on what matters instead of am I on mute or not.
Yeah, I think also just the validation, it seems like, is huge for you guys. I mean, I was looking at your KickTrack stats here, right? And it looks like you were doing really well for a bit, but you're kind of like lagging a little bit with the momentum, and then you just kind of skyrocketed there, right? I assume from, good Facebook ads, right? So to me, that's a huge validation that like eventually when you start selling this on your site and you start doing that type of advertisement, you're probably going to really grow this company a lot, I think.
Yeah, I think that there's massive potential out there. And for us, definitely, you covered two of the reasons that we did the Kickstarter. One was test the market before we go through those expensive tooling costs and setting up a supply chain. Let's test the market and see if, what we think is a great idea. Everyone loves their firstborn child. Sometimes your child screams and throws food at the restaurant. The rest of the world doesn't like that child. So let's test this, see if the rest of the world shares our view of MuteMe. And they definitely did in spades. And then part two to that certainly was being able to cover tooling costs and get the whole supply chain set up. So definitely, and yeah, the spike in December was certainly something that, I think there was momentum building. We were able to see the market, at least through Kickstarter thus far, really embrace that. And it's been exciting to watch.
With the tooling costs for a beginning entrepreneur, they might not have super clear insight into this, right? So tooling is kind of what allows you to make a lot of one product, right? Can you just really touch on that very briefly? Like, what exactly is tooling and how does that fit into the supply chain?
Right. So there's a couple aspects of tooling that for our product, we've got a couple key components. We have an injection molded plastic housing for the device. That's the round exterior. We have custom printed circuit boards on the interior, and then we have stainless steel surfaces as well, and the packaging that all goes in. Tooling is really hitting us on two primary areas, and that's the packaging and the injection molded housing. And so for these processes, you can't just wave a magic wand and have a round piece of plastic come out. So the injection molded process takes two pieces of metal, and these are blocks of metal that have precision carving in them in the exact negative space shape of our device. And then that single piece block of metal is used over and over, hundreds, thousands of times to inject plastic, let it cool, break apart, and repeat over and over and over. And so that tool, the mold is used again hundreds and thousands of times, has to be extraordinarily durable. But because it's such a precision tool, it's very expensive to make. On the soft tooling side, you're looking anywhere on the low side around $5,000. On the hard tooling side, for a complex item, you're looking upwards of $50,000 to $75,000. Once you make that mold, you had better not change your design, otherwise you're going to have to pay for a new mold. And so, there's this minimum threshold to make a single device. You have to pay that tooling fee. And so that really is something that I think Kickstarter can help with is, before you place the sunk costs into tooling, are you tooling for something that people want, or is it something that's going to have to change? On the packaging side, again, there's die cuts that have to be made and assembled to make custom packaging for exactly what we're doing. Obviously, we want to protect. We're not shipping stress balls. We're shipping precision electronics. And so we need to make sure that is durable packaging that's done precisely to size. So, tooling is really a sunk cost that's necessary, but it's all up front regardless of whether you make one or 100,000 devices. You really want to make sure you get that right.
And this would obviously be a lot faster than if you're just trying to 3D print like a bunch of these, right? Casings or something. What would you say is the difference between like the soft tooling and the hard tooling there?
Yeah, so it really comes down to the types of metals used and the quantities that you're looking at. So, when we were looking at this early on and thinking, well, maybe we're going to end up with 500 or 1,000 devices, one process we were looking at on the soft tooling side was a polyurethane injection molding process where there is not 3D CNC tooling that occurs to carve out a block. They actually do a liquid mold with silicone and then pour polyurethane in. It's a very cheap process, on the order of hundreds of dollars, up to, again, that sort of $5,000 threshold for some softer metals that are easier to work with. On the hard tooling side, they're more expensive because the metals are far more durable. And because the metals are more durable, they're more difficult to create. It's far more time intensive for the CNC machining process to make that impression, but then they last longer as well. So there's a balancing act. We all want to pay less, but if you're looking at higher volume, the hard tooling is going to get you a lot farther in your production line.
Very well said. Now, final question I have for you here on supply chain is this idea of like, okay, now you have 2,000 of these backers, 3,000 almost now, and you're going to have to like ship all these out to people all around the world, which I can imagine is just a huge, like, unfathomable number. Like, you're going to have your warehouse, you're going to have your garage completely filled with all of these, right? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, did you expect to have 3,000 people? What was your expectations?
Yeah, so, 3,000 people is a large number. I just pulled up the page to check. 2,985 backers.
And you got the Indiegogo, so it's like, goes over that a bit.
Goes going as well. And we had the opportunity to appear on a local news channel as well last week. And there were some Shopify purchases as well. So the number's growing. And again, we have enterprise customers reaching out as well. The number is one thing. You mentioned countries, though. I do want to touch on that. When we were setting up the Kickstarter campaign, we had an option for foreign shipping, and we sort of kicked it around for 5 minutes and said, yeah, let's check the box. Somebody in Canada might want this.
What could happen?
Yeah, and here we are, and I did refresh the numbers just before this call, but as of my last count, we had 54 countries, plus the United States, 55 countries that have backers or customers who have purchased this device. And so that has certainly introduced a whole nother level of complexity to the process, not just on the number of devices, but all of the hoops we need to jump through to get these to the backers. We've had the opportunity to engage directly with UPS. It has been great. We have actually a whole team locally, and they pulled in somebody else as well from the Bay Area who have been working with us. We're actually meeting with UPS and the U.S. Department of Commerce later this week as well to continue having those discussions around, not just the shipping and putting it in a box and sending it overseas, but there's also duties and tariffs and taxes that all need to be accounted for. And so, we're thrilled. I don't want my Canada comment to make somebody think that we are very excited that this is going global. But again, for the future Kickstarter campaign managers out there listening to this, certainly know what you're doing before you click that foreign shipping button, and make sure you've done a proper assessment of how much it would cost to ship that around the world. Because it's
just as a quick follow-up there, one of the most common questions I get is, hey, Sal, Kickstarter doesn't look like there's a way to do like sales tax and all of that stuff. I know you probably can't talk on this like on an official route, but do you have any thoughts on that? Is something that people even need to think about, or is that just not built into the functionality, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so from what we've seen so far, sales tax is not built into Kickstarter. Love to see that, but it's certainly been the cause of multiple meetings with our CPA, looking at how we're strategizing, how we're approaching sales tax, both for the backers that have contributed so far and what we're doing going forward, both on Indiegogo and through just our typical e-commerce sales going forward. So, there's certainly the sales tax component, but then also I would encourage people to look into the duties as well for importing into other countries, because that's certainly something that varies on a country by country basis and must be taken into account.
Well said. Well said. Well, this is a lot of great information. I think probably if just hearing your story, one of the things that really stood out to me the most is, you guys are obviously kicking ass, taking names, doing really well with this, but it all comes from this really strong set of values, I think, of number one, being able to create success for multiple people who can be a part of it and can shape the mission, working with your backers to a degree, and being willing to try out new stuff, whether that's Facebook ads or, seeing what happens and trying out international shipping. I think there's you've made a tremendous amount of growth since just having this idea in August.
I think that's, again, a testament to the team, as you mentioned, trying out new things. One thing that is the original 6, and we actually were fortunate enough, another software engineer a week ago, so we're up to 7 and an intern, so 8. But if I look at the original 6 and something we're looking for is we're adding to the team as well, despite various backgrounds and various skill sets, is a common curiosity and drive to figure things out and solve problems. And I would say that is absolutely key. For anyone on the beginning of this journey, the only thing that's certain is that anything you think will happen will not. It will be different. It will change. The problem you think you need to deal with next week will morph or go away completely and be replaced by 13 others. And so being able to flex and figure that out is key, not just to the product development itself, but really the entire process. And so really, truly be curious, be a problem solver. That's the only way you'll get through this with your sanity intact.
Very well said. Do you have any parting things you'd like to leave with the community? I know you now are in demand, right, for the Indiegogo. It sounds like you also have a Shopify store. Where can people go to learn a bit more?
Yeah, so go to Indiegogo and search for MuteMe. As I explained to my mother, she thought it was mutiny. No, it's MuteMe, MuteMe, as in push my mute button. But go to Indiegogo and check it out online there. Parting, I would just say, the difference between us being at $155,000 on Kickstarter with a successful campaign rolling into Indiegogo and e-commerce versus me sitting, drinking beer, telling friends in 5 years about this really great idea I had during the pandemic that never went anywhere, is that you have to act on it. And I think that's one thing that Kickstarter really is beneficial in lowering the threshold, not for quality, but for barriers to entry. Tooling's expensive. So many of these processes are expensive, but if you act, get the team together and turn an idea into a reality, Kickstarter can be a process for you to validate that and to raise funding as well. And so, I would just say so many people have great ideas. I know I've had ideas in the past I didn't act on. I think what this shows is that, and so many other campaigns show, is if you have an idea, do something with it. You don't want to be talking about that idea later. Turn it into reality, and Kickstarter can certainly facilitate that happening.
Well said. Man, thank you for coming on the show, sharing all those great tips, and I can't wait to see your success and hopefully come out with another Kickstarter. We'd love to have you back.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me on, Sal. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. If you missed it, my name is Sal. And on this show, we try to get in depth into these different campaigns and also the psychology of the entrepreneur. I studied econ in school, quote unquote, right? Because as you know, most people in the entrepreneurial or the digital marketing space, we always put down a little bit, traditional education just because it doesn't teach us very much, right? I did study econ and I love psychology. And I think the biggest thing that I missed out on in my education when I was younger was this information about team building and leadership. And I just kind of was like, yeah, I guess that's important, right? But you don't really think about it. You don't really think about how you can attract other people to work on your dream and to assemble your dream. Entrepreneurship is all about jumping off a cliff and trying to assemble a plane on the way down. I'm sure you've heard that saying before, but in reality, it's actually not like that. Instead, it's like you convincing other people, a bunch of other people, to jump off the cliff with you. And first of all, that takes a lot of persuasive ability and excitement about your idea and belief in yourself. But then it's also about not just you assembling this plane on the way down, but getting these other people to work together to assemble the plane on the way down. The media likes to portray starting a business and launching a new product as being a very me-centric thing. We see Steve Jobs, you see Elon Musk, or you see Amazon's Jeff Bezos, you see these big tech entrepreneurs, or Sam Walton. You have all these individuals who are idolized by Inc. magazine, by Forbes, these different publications that are really holding up the entrepreneur or holding up the leader. But in reality, let's be honest, their main ability is to convince people who are really good at what they do to follow them. That is literally the holy grail behind leadership, is being able to get other people to follow your vision to execute on, to bring their own unique skills and personality and ideas to your work. If you're not able to do that, it's all going to be you, and obviously if Steve Jobs didn't have Steve Wozniak and then in later years didn't have all the engineers working for him, he couldn't pull off these incredible product launches. Same thing goes with any other Richard Branson, right? If he didn't have tons of people that were working for him and helping him, and his persuasive ability to get people excited and to get them riled up and getting them ready to push forward with his ideas, then he wouldn't have a really big Virgin brand. So this is so important and something that's kind of glossed over because there's so much focus on the individual within our culture. But in reality, it's not. It's not about the individual. It's about your ability to attract other people to your idea, your ability to organize them, to get them beating to the same drum, to get them marching in the right direction, and really drawing and tapping into all of their unique skills and mindsets in order to pull together something that you yourself could never do. Now that's usually very scary the first time we think about this idea of like, what if people don't like the idea? What happens if people poke holes in it? If you're that kind of person, like obviously you need to partner with someone who can help you with this ways in the marketing and selling of the idea and the marketing and selling of the product and stuff. At the same time, I would push back a little bit and I'd say, I agree with you. I think that the person that you are before you launch a campaign and before you come out with a product is different than the person afterwards. When I speak with a founder after they've gone through this Kickstarter launch process, obviously I document that in my book, The Kickstarter Launch Formula, right? But when I talk with someone who beforehand, there's so much uncertainty, they don't know a lot about the whole process, they have no sense of marketing, they don't know a lot about the customer, there's so much uncertainty, a little bit of a lack of leadership, a lack of vision. But as they go through this process, and I literally call this a business boot camp, this is a business boot camp going through this process. They come out the other side and it's kind of like an initiation ritual because all of a sudden they have a renewed sense of confidence. They hear from real customers. They have people that are saying, I want this to exist. They're getting screenshots and photos and being tagged in Instagram posts of people saying, I love this, man. This is incredible, this thing, right? So you go through this process and you come out different on the other side. And my argument to you is maybe you're not the person that you need to be yet in order to grow this into a really big brand or to grow this into a lifestyle business that supports you and your family into the future, or it allows you just even work on the projects that you want to work on, right? And affords you that focus and lifestyle. Maybe you're not that person right now, but I virtually guarantee you that by going through this process on the other side, you're going to be a heck of a lot closer to the person that you've always wanted to become. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Leave a rating and review on iTunes. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Sal, and I will see you next time.